This is episode number 14 with Arthur Lynch. Welcome to the Doc Fitness podcast, where it's all about developing your mindset, training and nutritional knowledge so you can lose body fat and build muscle effectively while still living a real life. I am your host, David O'Connor. Now let's get into the show. How are we keeping, guys? And a big welcome back to the Doc Fitness podcast, and I suppose welcome to the first kind of official Doc Fitness podcast episode, because this is the first one since we've revamped the name and taken away the Grow podcast and just called the Doc Fitness podcast, because it just makes more sense and people would be less confused because of that, because I just think people in the past didn't know that there was a Doc Fitness podcast with it being called the Grow podcast in the past. So with that, I'm delighted to invite Arthur Lynch onto the show, who's a coach and powerlifter and spends the majority of his time deep in the trenches getting people strong. And that's what we wanted to base this podcast around. How do we bring up our squat, bench and deadlift? How do we get quote unquote stronger in those lifts? And I've kind of based it around the analogy of, like, let's just say if you have somebody who wants to get quote unquote stronger and they want to, but their kind of main overall goal is to build muscle tissue. Obviously, being stronger and able to shift more weight for more reps and that kind of stuff over time, strength is a vital component to that. So for the ladies, we build muscle tone. For the lads, just building muscle tissue, getting bigger. But again, same thing if you're literally just after focus on producing raw strength. You just want to get stronger. You don't really care too much about getting bigger. So with that, like, what happens when you come to a stage where maybe you're training for a while and you just can't seem to progress past a certain barrier with your lifts? You don't seem to be lifting or not progressing as fast as you used to progress, we'll say. Maybe you're hitting a wall with a certain weight, certain rep range, that kind of stuff. And this is why I wanted to bring Arthur on, to use his expertise to kind of dive into those realms and talk about that and see, right, is there any takeaways we can do here so we can leave and potentially get stronger in the squat, bench and deadlift. So yeah, without further ado, let's invite Arthur on the show. So Arthur, welcome to the podcast.
Hey David, how are you getting on?
Not too bad now, buddy, at all. Not too bad. And Arthur, before anybody even gets a chance to kind of tell who they are and their background and whatnot, I always have a little mini challenge for you to kick things off. And it's for your own benefit more than anything. But in 10 seconds or less, what is it that you do?
I lift weights, I study lifting weights, and I teach people how to lift weights.
That was planned, let's say, was it? Brilliant.
No.
And and look at Arthur, I suppose, just to create a bit of context down around what we're going to actually cover. We were talking about off air about going into kind of just basic progression of your squat, bench and deadlift, or main lifts, that kind of stuff, past a beginner stage for someone. But before we get into that, who is Arthur, and kind of like what are you basically doing right now, like, and what do you do as such in a bit more depth?
Sure, right, where do I start? So I started off in bodybuilding and then ventured over into powerlifting when I kind of got a bit sick of that, and that's where I'm spending most of my training focus now. In addition to that, I'm a strength training coach, powerlifting coach, based out of City Gym Limerick, and I offer some online coaching services as well through Sigma Nutrition and Performance. Academic side of things, I'm pursuing my PhD in exercise physiology and nutrient metabolism. I do a little bit of teaching as well on the side, just a little bit, nothing major. And I also host my own podcast, the No Lift Powerlifting podcast, which is part of the little mini company that I've set up. So you could say I'm an entrepreneur as well.
Definitely. And
in a nutshell, yeah, that's kind of everything I do.
And how did you, like, what kind of set you off to start out in the bodybuilding world? Was it just, did you start lifting kind of on your own, or did you have influences from somebody?
Yeah, sure. So I got into lifting weights kind of by accident. Funnily enough, my first venture into the gym actually didn't go so well. So through work experience placement when I was in fifth year in school, and then that just didn't go really well. I just did not enjoy the cleaner for 2 weeks. Just the whole experience just really put me off the gym. But luckily then a year later, repeated fifth year when I was in school, when I was still playing rugby, my club, Shannon Rugby Club, at the end of the season they had decided that rather than kind of let lads off and just fart around for the summer and then come back for pre-season in terrible shape, they try and get them to do a strength and conditioning course over the summer. So I went to UL with other members of the team. We were given instructions on how to lift weights, some dietary recommendations, for performance and general health and that kind of thing. And then from that summer on, I guess you could say I never really looked back. So I kind of on lifting weights and kind of ventured out of rugby then in that following season. Ironically enough, you would start lifting rugby, but then you'd start to like lifting weights more than playing rugby, so you pack in rugby. And then, so then kind of got, the interaction between weight training and nutrition and the adaptations that it causes in the body. And so then I may as well study this in university because that's what I'm interested in. So that's what led me into sport and exercise sciences at the University of Limerick. And then the bodybuilding then, that actually kind of came a couple of years later because it was just something I kind of always in my mind kind of tied with the idea of doing, because when I was a teenager and that, I was a little bit on the chubby side, and I wouldn't say I got bullied or anything like that, but kind of got teased about it every now and then, and just made feel a little conscious of it, if you like. And so then I kind of said, well, for someone who's a former chubby boy to make it to a bodybuilding stage, like how cool would that be? And so then that's what I did. I did a couple of shows, but unfortunately, like my experience of it, and part of it was because of my own. I never really had a coach or a mentor or someone kind of there to tell me, like, stop doing this. This is stupid. This is leading you down the wrong road. Or sort of obsessing over things and kind of get very food focused and kind of overly regimented, if you like. And that's not really good for your physical or your mental well-being. So then while I kind of decided, look, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm just going to go back to being a guy who lifts weights. Then I did that for a while, and then I decided, if I could try it and see what I think, and loved it from the very first event I took part in, and then that brings me to today. So I've been a powerlifter ever since, I guess.
Okay, brilliant. Because I remember Arthur back in when was it? It would have been pre-2012, anyway, sometime between 2008, 2012. I remember seeing you in UL gym when I kind of first copped on with kind of going out every night of the week in college and actually going to the gym. Because when I went out to college, hurling went out the window for me because I was away and I didn't bother travelling back home for training sessions or whatnot. So I remember back in the day, I used to think that you were like 5 or 6 years older than me. I don't know why, but that was back in probably, so it was 2010. I think, and I just remember you on the bench press being so fucking detailed with putting on like certain plates and the reps you were doing and everything, and there was me kind of my first couple of weeks in the gym just trying to find my way around the fucking place and know what the hell I'm at. But then you've this lad here being absolutely like dialed in with absolutely every little like minor detail you were doing, which were not minor details or big details, which were setup and breathing and everything like. But so it was that kind of memory stuck in my head. Then when I seen you pop up with when I got to know Garrett and down City Gym, and then you were training in with Garrett and whatnot. So it's cool just to think back about that as well, because I've seen that kind of, I suppose when I think about it, I've seen the kind of passion you had for back then, and you were probably only, so you were definitely only 19, 20 back then, were you? Maybe a bit younger even?
Yeah, it would have been
2010, yeah.
Would have been 18 then, yeah. So 25 now.
Wow, yeah. And, yeah, crazy. I don't know why I always thought you were a couple of years ahead of me. So, in terms of kind of, if I was to start lifting weights and I kind of like my general goal is strength and hypertrophy. I want to get stronger and I want to get a bit bigger. That's kind of my general goal. I don't play a sport. I've been lifting for kind of like 7 or 8 months now, and I've been doing kind of the workout structure on the main lifts, and I've progressed my squat, my bench, my deadlift, and a few accessory moves, and I've got stronger each week. But now I'm coming to a stage, Arthur, where hypothetically speaking, I'm hitting the wall with my squats and my deadlifts and that kind of stuff. And I've always been lifting around with, say, the 5 rep range, 6 rep range, because it's what I've learned online. But I can't seem to break past progressing as fast as I used to. So that's what I want to base this podcast around, and kind of just to see, right, what could we kind of do next from here to keep that progression going? Because obviously things need to change, and when you move from a beginner level into more intermediate level with your lifting technique and that kind of training age over time. So yeah, I suppose what would be, and even from your own experience back in the day, like what would be some mistakes you see kind of people start from day one that they carry with them when they do get that bit more experience, or they do have that year of training under their belts? So the mistakes that they maybe carried from the first time they were in the gym, they're still there now. Do you see any of those kind of reoccurring over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. The mistakes that I would have made was rotating exercises too frequently. So like without any real rapper, so like I might do a 5 or 6 week block of back squats, and then I'm like, okay, that went great. I'll do front squats now, and then I'll do brain split squats. That'll be my main movement, and then I come back around again to the back squat after that, and then I'm realizing that, hang on, I'm using roughly the same weight I was when I last did this exercise. So I don't know if that's maybe something you see as well, but exercises without any real, as I say, kind of justification or rationale for it. That would be one thing. I think as well, particular rep ranges, because as you say, it's what they learned was best, or it works very well for an extended period of time. So your inclination is to kind of stick there. But I think embracing particularly lower rep ranges, so in the 1 to 3 rep range, because I mean, if you're to try to build max strength, you want to be training specific to that. And the 1 to 3 rep range is more specific to a 1RM than 5 or 6 reps, That's not to say that 5 or 6 reps you can't get strong off that, but it's just that the 1 to 3 rep range, that's more specific to a 1RM. I think as well, looking at things like training frequency, when you're starting off, you can probably do an exercise once a week and make good progress for, however long. But then in time, you get to the stage where you need to, you need to increase the stimulus you're giving your body to adapt. So the ways you can do that is by increasing your frequency. And how that helps is, well, there's 2 ways. You're training the muscles and the nervous system to get better at that movement more frequently. And you're practicing the movement as well. So you develop your set of that, that particular movement. So if it's a squat, for example, I mean, a lot of people don't think of lifting weights as skills, but they are essential. They're movement patterns that need to be trained, so that you keep sharp, if you like, at those skills. In terms of other things that people do, one thing that I find a lot of people are afraid to do is they're afraid to embrace gaining weight, all of a sudden balloon up. But I mean, we're talking about slow, gradual increases in your body weight over time, which will allow you to put on more muscle mass, which in turn will help you to lift more weight. People aren't, they're not eating enough, or they're not, their diet isn't supportive of what they're trying to do. I think that can certainly be one of their downfalls. Okay,
so like you're talking about not tapping into probably fundamentally lower rep ranges, because if they do want to really get stronger and really push those boundaries, they have to be kind of training, at least going from a fucking 6 rep range to a 3 is going to be a different stimulus for them. Like, so they'll train that strength rep range a bit more. And then you're talking about frequency. So just to kind of circle back, is 2 things really. You're practicing that skill a bit more, and you're probably allowing for more volume across the week to handle more volume for the future as well. Is that kind of what you were getting at with that, Arthur, was it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we know that volume is a very strong predictor of muscle growth and strength. I mean, if you look at like all the popular, not all of them, but many popular training programs, like for example, Small Love Junior, which is based around just a kind of a short-term burst in your training volume, where you're training the particular movement, is if it's the squat or the bench 4 times a week, and you're just hammering it with volume, but it'll be effective. Now, the downside of it is, because you're drastically increasing your volume, depending on where you were before you started, you can leave yourself vulnerable to things like joint issues like patellar tendinopathies or elbow tendon, or these kind of things that we kind of want to avoid for the kind of long-term health of our our body and to kind of ensure that we're still able to lift weights and we're not completely crocked up by the time mid-30s. But yeah, I guess what you're saying is right. So we're looking at manipulating volume as a means to, keep progressing in the main lifts, and also as well, kind of embracing the lower rep ranges. We're getting closer to the 1RM. Getting more specific, because we're training in 1s and 2s and 3s, the intensity is more specific to 1RM as well,
Okay, so going forward from there then, obviously if somebody has a movement kind of or technique issue, you're obviously going to address that first. But let's just say if somebody came to you and bear in mind again, they're not looking to do powerlifting, for example, but they just want to, they have the general goal again, they want to get stronger, they want to get bigger. And I know, you could tip away kind of in that kind of around that 5 rep range, you could say, and they could very slowly progress as I did for fucking years, but again, I always got tangled up and I wanted to dip my feet in powerlifting. I wanted to dip my feet in just kind of getting bigger. I wanted to go back playing hurling, and I was kind of confused at all those routes I was taking. So after all, while I did put on a bit of mass and put on a bit of size, my strength wasn't where I wanted it to be. I was getting stronger in the movements I love the most, like the deadlift, but that's because I was doing them more often and I was able to push them that bit more. Whereas with squats and whatnot, it took me a while to figure out how I was a lot stronger with low bar and then high bar, because I used to train with high bar only, then I went training with low bar, and then I stopped squatting for a while and just only did single leg stuff because I injured my fucking knee and all this kind of crack. So I've kind of went through exactly what we've talked about there, but obviously if I wanted to take it up a notch, then I wanted to kind of, let's just say if I was repping 100 kilos for 5 reps, and I want to bring that to at least 130, 140 for, even if I was repping it the same. It's not going to happen overnight, but things like movement quality, breathing, they obviously need to be addressed first. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, well definitely. I mean, look, it's often the case where someone has come to me and they're struggling with the lift, and just by improving their technique, just by changing something technically, we can put more weight on the bar there and then. I mean, that doesn't mean that I made them stronger there, because I made their movement more efficient, so they're able to lift more weight. Yeah, that's obviously the first thing. Then you'd look at, for example, particular weak muscle group, perhaps a mobility restriction that could be hindering them. A common thing that we see, with power lifters, for example, strong in certain areas, but then in other areas, they're relatively quite weak. For example, like the upper back, external rotation of the shoulder, hip abduction, those kind of patterns, they tend to get weak and sort of leave them susceptible to injuries that are as a result of those weaknesses. So they're kind of potential physical constraints. Then we look at the training. And if the training is solid, well then perhaps it's a mental block. Not to sound sexist, but oftentimes this is more common with females. And I'll give you an example. It would be like a particular number in the bench. It would be 50 kilos or it might be 60 kilos. And even just seeing that loaded on the bar sometimes can cause like alarm bells to go off in their head, and they just have they just kind of have a shit attack, Sometimes even a thing like, for example, loading the bar differently can make all the difference. So instead of loading it with 2 yellow plates for 50 kilo bench, you might have 10 and 2.5s. So it just looks less intimidating for them. Things like that. Or, for example, this was a really good one, a good example I heard from Josh Hancock when he was over here a couple of years back. So back when he was very high level in the IPF, he used to be miles ahead of everyone on squat. He used to be very competitive on bench, and then his deadlift would just completely let him down. So coming into deadlift, he'd be way ahead on subtotal and then lose it because his deadlift was so far behind the rest. So, and part of that was because he didn't actually enjoy deadlifting. One of the things he did was through kind of psychological skills training, he had to try and convince himself, almost trick his mind into believing, I love deadlifting. So that when he would come into the gym to train deadlift, instead of going in and not wanting to do it, he'd go in and actually be excited about deadlifting. As he continued to train in that frame of mind, he actually began to enjoy deadlifting, and his deadlift started to go up. So, in a nutshell, I mean, you look at the technical things first, you look at the physical limitations, you look at their training, and then you look at perhaps any mental blocks that might be restricting.
Yeah, like I think I can relate to the deadlift thing there with Josh. It was the same for me with the squat. Constantly telling myself that because my like leg lengths and whatnot were so long that I thought squats are just harder for me in general, and then I'd be bed up then from maybe hurling 3 sessions a week, and I just find an excuse to skip squats that week, and then, or even like if I had 2 squat sessions, I do the one earlier in the week, but then I'd miss the second one because I'd just be so bed up from hurling. But I'd always be way down as to what I could. So if I wanted to lift it at a certain percentage of my 1RM, let's say, it was probably like 10% or 5% lower than it always, because I just knew that if I did put on that weight, I'd just be crippled like for the rest of the session. I wouldn't enjoy it, like I'd be daunted by it. Whereas if it was deadlifts or a bench, I'd happily get under there and do that. Like, so I started to tell myself that I need to enjoy fucking squatting. I need to enjoy the lower body work if I wanted to get bigger quads. That was the main goal at the time. And I did make a nice bit of progression, like, but now again, I find with kind of juggling hurling season and whatnot, I'm starting to hit a wall again now, because I switched out from low bar squats, for example. I got strong for me in those, but then I realised that my quads are just so fucking weak that I had to kind of load them a lot more. So I switched out low bar squats like a year and a half ago and brought in only high up, but I'm only up repping now with say 130 kilos for that 5 to 6 rep range, which again, it's big for me, but again, from a powerlifting perspective, it's probably nothing. But for me, that was, you're talking progressions of 30% over a year, which probably is a lot for somebody kind of that's training for at least over a year anyway, like, and playing a sport with it. So no, I can totally relate. Is the fucking answer to that. I don't know, I went off there in a bit of a deep personal story about my squats, but going forward from there then, so just a note again on the training, like we talked about movement quality, is there a mobility issue, breathing, that kind of things, the mental aspect of it. Just to cycle back to training, because I think this is where the biggest kind of takeaways are going to be. Like, what we talked about going from down to the 3 rep range, Arthur, but what about training, like for example the squat? We'll stay in the squat 2 days a week, 3 days a week, the frequency side of it. I know you brushed on it a bit, but maybe we can get a bit more concrete on it. Let's just say if I squat 1 day a week, right, is my main squat lift, and I have a couple of accessories that day, and then later on the week I might do some deadlifts, but I also do like another lower body quad movement in that session, but it's not a squat. Would you look at things like maybe making that second lower body movement later on the week? Would you maybe look at that, making that what am I trying to get at? A squat, the same squat pattern as you did earlier on the week? Is that what you mean by the frequency side of it? I probably just answered that, like, but I'm dumbing it down a small bit.
Yeah, no, I think I know what you're getting at. So how I kind of like to is sort of look at what's the smallest worthwhile change you can make, right? And let me give you an example. Let's just say for that person who's squatting once a week, and they're starting to get frustrated with their lack of progress, and then they read an article online about Smolov Jr. And I know I've mentioned this already, but then they're like, God, the gains off this sounds amazing. It's 15 to 20 kilos on your squat in 4 weeks or something like that. And then they start it, and then lo and behold, 3 weeks in, their knees are completely shot. What that person would have probably better off doing was just increase to twice a week, and then they'll get progress from that. So that represents the smallest worthwhile change. Or it could be, for example, adding a particular assistance exercise. So you're weak in the bottom quarter, say, of the squats. You bring in pause squats or pin squats. Or, for example, if your upper back tends to cave, obviously you'd look at cueing to make sure that you're tight before you descend and all that. Make sure your breathing is right, bracing, all that kind of thing. But if it's the upper back, you might do, for example, safety bar squats. Or there's a really cool assistance exercise that I've seen Greg Knuckles do a few times. I'll try my best to describe this, because obviously it would be better to show people. But if you imagine coming out of a power rack, and you have a band that's attached to the bottom of the rack and on one end, and then attached sort of around your neck on the other end, and it's trying to pull you down and forward, right? So it's kind of it's kind of making a 45-degree angle relative to the rack, and relative to your torso, if that makes sense.
Is it centered?
Sorry, yeah, centered. So it wouldn't be at one side of the rack. It would be in the middle of the rack. You could do it another way as well. You could have two bands sort of over either side of the rack, the two sleeves of the barbell. Same idea, trying to pull you forward. So you're having to consciously compensate for that by pushing back more, you know. So it's sort of look at it from that point of view. What's the smallest thing I can change to make a worthwhile difference? And then that's when you think of, you know, adding another squat day, adding a particular assistance exercise, adding more volume generally, be that per session or by adding a second day. You know, by adding a second day, you're increasing frequency, but you're also increasing volume. So kind of killing two birds with one stone there. And the reason I say look at the smallest worthwhile change is because you also have to balance the fact that, you know, all training is a stimulus for increasing strength and muscle growth and all that, but it's a stressor, and it's a stressor on things like joints and that kind of thing. So, I mean, you don't want to cue your load. That's what kind of leaves you vulnerable to overuse injuries, to flare-ups with tendons and things like that. The other question I think you were asking was about if you're having a second squat day, what that should look like, is it?
Yeah, like, so if I was somebody that was just doing, let's just say I trained my lower body on a Monday and I did some RDL work, I did some squats, and then maybe I did some fucking walking lunges, for example, and I trained deadlifts then on the Friday, which would be my second lower body style day, but we'll say I call it a full body day, and I usually might do maybe some sort of single leg work again, or lower body quad work, but it's not squats. It would make sense, I was just saying, to throw in squats there to train that pattern a bit more and create more volume in that actual lift. Yeah,
I think so. Like, obviously my bias will be towards putting the main lift in as your focus initially, and then if there's a solid rationale for having a different exercise in there, well then plow ahead. Like, for example, your main movement might be a pause squat, or it could be a front squat. If it's deemed that will address your limiting factor, well then it's probably a good idea then to prioritize it within a session. Another thing you kind of just touched on there, which that kind of struck a chord with me, as you were saying. So, for example, if your session looks something like squats, or mainly in deadlifts, a few others, and some walking lunges, for example. Another mistake I find some people as well is that they're doing too much non-specific work that's actually just fatiguing them and eating into their recovery. A good example being walking lunges, because not to knock them as an exercise, they're fantastic exercise, but one of the things about them is that you get quite sore off them. So perhaps taking that out and just allowing a little bit more scope for recovery, particularly if you're training your lower body that little bit more frequently, so that you can recover better session to session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as well, I was probably confusing a bit, because I probably should have made it a bit more clear, like in terms of just creating context around it a bit more. So, like, let's say for example, my ultimate goal really, this person's ultimate goal is to get quote unquote bigger, right? But he wants to get stronger along the way, like a lot of lads do. So the way we program that, we'll say, is we have, like, if you look at a 12 to 15 week training cycle, within those cycles you might have 2 of those blocks will be hypertrophy specific blocks, and then we'll have like an intensity focused block, so a strength focused block. So you're building that volume, you're building that hypertrophy, and then when you go into your strength block, you're basically giving your body a break from all the volume and all the kind of bodybuilding style training, if you like, and you're focusing more on the strength aspect of your training. So when you go back into another hypertrophy style block to build more muscle tissue, you're a bit stronger. So what we're kind of talking about here is to kind of everything that we're talking about now here, and maybe leaving out the walking lunges, for example, that would detract from your main squat, for example, would be to kind of save that for this kind of strength-based phase. And then I suppose within the hypertrophy blocks as well, like, we like to keep obviously we keep progressing strength as the main part of each session, but obviously, like you were saying, the more volume you're going to create in the rest of that session, it's going to take away from those main lifts, and you're not going to be able to probably lift as maximally as you can across the week. So when you come and look at it then from your perspective side of things, from a powerlifting point of view, or even just from a pure raw strength point of view, there needs to be some trade-offs there. Obviously, if I'm fucking adding in walking lunges and other things because I want to build muscle as well, I'm already kind of limiting myself, haven't I, in a way like where I can't produce the maximum amount of strength possible because there's too much fatigue built up as the weeks go on. Does that make sense a bit more? Like, so, yeah, save this kind of stuff for, not even save it all of it, like, but more so what we're talking about in this kind of podcast is more directed towards a strength-focused block as such.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at there. You know, you can't do everything all at once, and you have to look at other things that might be impeding on your ability to recover, because I mean that's so important. I mean, if you're going into the gym, like if you're looking at fatiguing yourself, actually going into the gym and absolutely knackering yourself, if you're looking at that as an outcome variable, as something that you actually seek out, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. The outcome needs to be looked at as, you know, the tangibles, the increases in strength, the increases in muscle tissue, all that kind of thing, and then the fatigue and that kind of stuff, that's a byproduct, you know.
No, definitely, and it's just to drive home the point. Like that's kind of the way we mainly train people out here, obviously as well. Like our main focus is body composition kind of gains as such. But as what I remember is fine is like if somebody comes to us and they're 2 or 3 stone overweight and they lose that, and then they start to see abs appearing, then they start to appreciate the main movements more. They start to appreciate their squats going up, their deadlifts going up, their bench going up. But again, it's because we like that as well. We like that kind of stuff, and kind of showing them, look, if you get an appreciation for a movement and you dial in all those little tiny details, it's almost like it becomes your sport in a way. And it gives people that did play sport in the past like nearly a new lease of life as well for progressing that. So, no, it's all that stuff is perfect, Arthur. And one thing that we kind of brushed over as well was, obviously we need to address movement quality. Is there a technique issue that needs to be cleaned up? Is there a mobility issue that needs to be cleaned up? That's another podcast in itself. And I think even for episode 1 of this podcast too, we talked with Gar about that, so people can go back to that if they want to check that one out. But just for breathing, Arthur, like, I don't want to brush over breathing because I think I personally see it as a massive aspect of it. I know you guys probably emphasize it a lot more when somebody starts in City Gym because of that powerlifting focus, we'll say. But it's something that we teach like in their first session. Like we might go through some breathing patterns and see what they're like, but we mightn't start to drive it home until they start to get up to really respectable weights, kind of lifting as the weeks go on. So. But we see that then, like, for people that come to us, it's such a limiting factor in the fact that, yeah, they're getting stronger, but they're having a clue how to breathe properly. So, how would you describe in a podcast how to breathe properly for a squat, for example? Or obviously, it's the same for nearly everything, like, but just to kind of touch on the aspect or note of breathing.
Yeah, it's definitely an important factor. I don't know if it'd be something I'd be looking at from day one with someone, but definitely early on, you know. And you see this fairly commonly. I've given workshops and seminars and stuff where I've looked at people squatting and then I've changed their breathing, and they're literally there and then they're able to add more weight to the bar. The common improper way of breathing, if you like, is if someone's set up for squats with the bar on their back, they're just about to descend, they breathe in, and then you see the chest rising. That means that they're breathing up into their thoracic cavity, which is not what we want, and it's not going to create the maximal amount of stabilization that we desire before for squatting and deadlifting and that kind of thing. What you want to do is actually fill your belly full of air. Think of it like a balloon that you're trying to inflate maximally. So you breathe in, take a deep breath of air into the belly, and then lock it into place. So you're tensing all the muscles that are required to stabilize the trunk. So you have the abdominals, the obliques, the erectors, all that kind of thing. And then you're locked in. The thing as well, if you think about how a weightlifting belt works, some people think that a weightlifting belt is something you strap on as tight as you can to protect your back, or something like that. And whilst it can protect your back, that's not quite how you use it. What you want to do is put it on relatively loose. So, I mean, there should be a good bit of space between the belt and your stomach before you before you go to lift. And then as you unrack the bar, walk out, and then you take your air in, then you should be able to close the space between your stomach and the belt by doing that. And it also gives something for your muscles to kind of to brace against. So if you imagine, like if you just put your hand out and just try to push as hard as you can against nothing, like just the air around you. Now contrast that with if you put your hand up against a wall and try to push against as hard. The difference in the amount of force you can create. That's kind of an analogy for how you should use a weightlifting belt. So hopefully that describes it reasonably well. It would be obviously 10 times easier if you can kind of visualize that somewhat.
No, it's brilliant actually. Yeah, it's a very good analogy. We use a couple. Which one does I use? For the breathing analogy, sometimes I talk about a car tire and how just to kind of, it's to emphasize the importance of it for them. So if they take a full breath of air in down deep into the diaphragm, we'll say, and they fill up the car tire with air, and then if they get to the top of their squat, for example, and they blow out all the air so that they deflate the whole tire, it's kind of not what you want as well. You're letting out a bit of air and you're taking a bit back in, you're going back down again. So you're keeping that kind of tire up and down as you're going. That's probably to emphasize people not to fucking do complete full breaths in between. Just to make sure they're keeping the tension and keeping that kind of bracing there. But that analogy for the weight belt is brilliant. I've heard a lot of different schools of thought with it, like, because obviously coming from a background not devoured in powerlifting, like I learned off lads like yourselves down in City Gym how to use a fucking weightlifting belt. But I've also seen other different powerlifting guys say, you might have heard this quote before, it's not a fashion accessory, don't be wearing it fucking loose, wear it as tight as you can, this kind of stuff. So it's interesting now that I've kind of seen that. I usually go, like, I put it on, so maybe I might be able to fit my kind of fingers down in it comfortably enough, not crazy tight or anything like that. I don't feel like I'm going to die with it. But then when I brace, I don't feel like it's fucking squishing me to death, like, that's the easiest way we kind of judge it, like. And
some people, they wear a belt too tight, and it actually hinders them instead of helping them because they can't brace into the belt properly.
Yeah, because the belt is, makes sense, makes perfect sense. And Arthur, like, what we've kind of gone through, like, will this carry over the same then for the bench press and for the deadlift? Like, what would you change differently? Probably, obviously, we know there's a movement, quality, technique, mobility, breathing, all that kind of stuff to address. But for training purposes, for increasing my bench press, for example, what way would you approach that?
Same kind of ideas, really. The bench is a bit of an oddball out of the three of them in that I'd probably have more. I'd probably use more assistance exercises and not just the competition lift, more so with the bench press, because there's more. There's just more going on really, because you have you want things like having a stable base, through the lower body and the back and around the shoulder blades and all that. But the actual muscles, the prime movers that are performing the movement, the triceps, the shoulders, and the pecs, I can include specific exercises for each of those. So I might have, for example, dumbbell presses or incline presses for the pecs. I could have some overhead work to get the shoulder strong. I might do more lockout work and stuff to get the triceps stronger. I generally don't take that approach, particularly with the deadlift anyway, and certainly to a lesser extent the squat as well. The other thing as well with the bench, because the absolute load is lower, you can train it with more volume and more frequently. And it's not as taxing as a squat or a deadlift. For the deadlift then, I certainly wouldn't be an advocate of high frequency deadlift programs. I think that they're a recipe for injury, personally. I think twice a week is a good general rule of thumb for the deadlift. And depending on someone's ability that could be one heavy deadlift session and one reduced intensity session, or it could be a session where you're doing things like pause deadlifts or control tempo deadlift, so you deliberately slow down, particularly the eccentric. It's just a way to modulate how much load you can use. So you don't have to go heavy in that particular session, but you can still get a benefit from it. So like if I was to give general recommendations, once you get advanced and you've built up to it, squatting 2 to 3 times a week, bench somewhere between 2 and 4 times a week, and deadlift 1 to 2 times a week in terms of training frequency.
Okay. What about the one thing that we see a lot of is just bench press width. If somebody's come to us from benching a while, they always have their standard kind of like, it's almost like nearly a fucking close grip in one way, like, and then we might work at finding a grip that's more optimal for shifting more load and whatnot. So maybe talk about, have you any input in terms of bench press grip and even setting up for the bench as well and creating that arch, that kind of stuff? I suppose it probably bears touching on at least, I'd say.
We're talking about obviously trying to lift the most amount of weight possible here.
Yeah.
So in theory, as wide as you can go. The other thing as well is if you have an overly narrow grip, you're not maximizing the amount of contribution you can get from your pecs, which is going to be shortchanging your progress because you have this massive muscle group that you're not taking the full advantage of. From if you like a physics perspective, you want to try and get as close to a vertical forearm the movement as possible, because if you imagine you're trying to open a door, if you push on the door at an angle, you have force that's being wasted in a direction that's not moving the door. But if you push at right angles to the door, it'll move in the direction you want, and all the force you're applying is going into that direction. So it's kind of the same idea with the bench press. So if your forearm is at 90 degrees to the bar, the force you're producing is going directly into moving that bar, if that makes sense.
No, definitely.
But obviously with the wider grips, it's not always possible to achieve that, but you're trying to keep it as close as possible. So, for example, you'll touch higher on your chest as a result if you have a wider grip. Now, all that said, for training purposes, there's a lot of value in using narrower grips because you get the advantage of longer ranges. You get a little bit more emphasis on the triceps, which is obviously a really important muscle for the bench press. Then the other question then was about developing an arch. The thing is with the arch is that some people who are incredibly strong bench pressers don't arch because they can't. They just don't have the mobility for it, There's a great bench presser from Kerry, I don't know if you've heard of him, James O'Connell. He's from Tralee, and he has about either 220 or 230 bench press. I can't remember exactly, but I mean his back is completely flat on the bench. Now he'd be 120, 125 kilos at like 5'9", so he's a big stocky man, but he's not one of these guys getting into a wicked arch position. The other thing as well is that you don't see, for example, you see the common thing on whatever YouTube or Facebook is. You'll see a video shared of a guy with the wicked arch and a 4-inch range of motion, and then everyone's losing their shit over saying, oh, this is cheating, this is this, that, or the other. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. But the thing is, you don't see too many guys with a really large arch and a very short range of motion. You don't see too many that benching well in excess of 200. There's just not that many of them there. It tends to be the lighter guys who are doing that. And to a degree, they kind of have to do that because it's the only way that they're going to shorten their range of motion. Because if they want to stay in the lighter weight classes, where they're more competitive, then they can't put on too much mass. They can't put on too much muscle. So they have to find other ways to get around that, to lift more weight. And one of the ways of doing that is developing a stronger arch. How to go about doing it? As I say, some people will just never really be able to get into a good arch. Like anything though, if it's something you want to develop, you need to practice it. So every bench session you go in, you probably need to spend some dedicated time on the upper back mobility and all that kind of thing to help develop it. Ensure that you're doing upper back strengthening as well, so things like vertical pulling movements, chin-ups, pull-ups, snap pull-downs, all that kind of thing, and horizontals as well, mostly rowing variations, that kind of thing. But, well, I'm definitely not a flexibility expert, so I don't really have too much advice beyond that in terms of how to develop a good arch. But like anything, keep practicing it. When you're arching, you want to make sure that the vast majority of the arch is coming through the thoracic spine and not the lumbar spine. If it's going through the lumbar, you're kind of leaving yourself a little bit more vulnerable to injury there. So that's when someone asks me, is an arch dangerous, for example? I'd say 9 times out of 10, no. But you can find some people it will cause a lot of aggravation if the majority of their arch is coming through their lumbar spine, their lower back,
Mm-hmm. So probably the main takeaway though from all that is that it's completely individualized really at the end of the day. And I think the main theme of this, Arthur, as well as I'm going to rob this quote for this podcast definitely, is what's the smallest worthwhile change you can make and see a difference with. Like, so again, if people are kind of going to reverse over what we've already said, there's so many small things we've kind of got, like so many small points we've touched on, which are literally one thing you can take away and do out of probably a fucking list of a lot of things, So again, with the bench press, if you're trying to increase it, like obviously you could look at grip width and that kind of stuff, but in terms of the training frequency, you're saying you might be able to handle a bit more volume. There's a bit more accessories you can do for it. But similar to the squat, like you'll train the actual bench press. You might train it in a pause. You might train it in different methods as well, and according to your weaknesses and whatnot. Deadlift wise, then similar. I know you already said it with the deadlift. You might have max 2 sessions a week with the deadlift. One heavy session if you like, and then one maybe kind of less intensity session. But it might be focusing more on pauses or that kind of stuff. I suppose that's the main takeaway. Like, is there any other key things to add in there with that? Like, have we touched on everything? Do you think for giving people a couple of recommendations they can go away to hopefully improve their squat, bench, and deadlift?
That would be the majority of it. The only other things I might add would be to recognize that all of this is highly individual. All the recommendations, they're there for the vast majority of people. They're for probably about 70% of people, and then there's going to be people either side of that where a different approach might be required. But like for the most part, they would be solid recommendations for a lot of people. And then the other thing as well is trial and error. Try something, keep everything else constant, and then give it however long is appropriate to see if it actually makes a difference. And then at the end of that training period, however long it may be, reassess. Ask, did changing this factor make any kind of a difference? If yes, then we hold on to it. If not, well, then maybe we need to try something else,
Yeah.
That'd be kind of my recommendation there. The other thing as well is, I can't stress this enough, don't try to change too many things all at once, because it's just not going to, more than likely not going to lead to a favourable outcome.
100%. And I always get this way as well, Arthur. Like I might come up with fucking good ideas to talk about stuff in a podcast and whatnot and go through X, Y, and Z. But then when you get into the meat and bones of it, you realise, oh shit, all these questions are so fucking, you can go on so many different tangents with them, and they always, at the end of the day, they always come back to that, that one individual that might, and it's, as you said, it's trial and error with different people, like. But yeah, just to kind of wrap it all up then, I know I might have confused things a small bit, not creating context around, obviously, the main goal here for this person, for example, is they want to build strength and hypertrophy and whatnot. But if you're looking to really increase your squat, bench, and deadlift, you need to ask yourself, like, at the end of the day, like, what is your number one priority goal? Is it just to kind of, you want to stroke your ego a bit and lift a bit more weight in the gym, which is perfectly fine? Is it to get stronger, which is going to subsequently lead you into lifting more weights for building muscle down the line? Is it powerlifting you want to go down to? Do you play sport? There's all these kind of questions that come in with this as well. So these are probably general recommendations that you can look at for shifting more weight in the squat, bench, and deadlift. And if I've left that out there, Arthur, throw it in. I think that pretty much wraps it up, though.
No, that's spot on. I completely agree with you on all that there.
And I was chatting to a couple of friends and coaches in the gym, and even some of our members asked them over the last few weeks if you had any questions and whatnot. And this is kind of this is where this was based on. But just literally before I logged on to come on air with you, I got a message off somebody. I think you're going to know who it is, but here's a question for you. And he asks, what is the best way to make new friends?
And I can't figure out who asked that now. Tell me afterwards, maybe. But what's the best way to make new friends? I guess, like generally, just be nice to people and help them. I think if you, yeah, that's I think, yeah, like helping people and just generally being friendly and stuff. I'm probably not the best at it because I'm well known for my social awkwardness and that kind of thing. So I'm not the best.
Oh, is that where it's coming from?
First impressions. That kind of thing. Huh?
Is that why that question came in? Is it?
Potentially, yeah. But I'm just telling you how it is with me. But yeah, like, and it's funny. I've made just lifting weights because we have this common interest, if you like, and I've made like over the last few years, as I said, what I've been doing has been lifting weights, learning about lifting weights and teaching people. Meet a lot of people through those avenues, and you do develop, I guess, friendships over time as a result, just because you have shared interests. But just general recommendations that would just apply to how you should live your life. Just be nice to people, and be friendly, be welcoming, all that kind of stuff.
That was actually a nice way to wrap up the podcast.
Yeah, I guess it was. Yeah.
No, and Arthur, I always like to ask kind of people what were their biggest takeaways from the last year. But in terms of your own personal lifting, what was the biggest takeaway for you over the last year?
Something training related, is
it?
Well, this is going to sound very funny, but for about 18 months, my bench was completely stuck, and it was frustrating because my training. So there was weren't reflecting the progress I was making in training. So, for example, my best bench at the time was 170. But I could do 3x3 at 162.5. So, just based off that, I should be able to press more than 170 in comp. So I said to myself, right, I'm going to get to the point where I can double 170 in training. And surely to God, then I'll bench more in comp. And lo and behold, that's what happened. So then last year I made some. Yeah, so then last year I made some great progress on my bench and I got up to 180, and so now I'm trying to find a way to get that up even more again. But I was it seemed like a ridiculous kind of logic, but it worked. So that's just a little personal story, I guess.
Crazy, to be honest. Just for the listeners as well, what are your current? I know they're up on the City Gym website, but are they your current max lifts?
I haven't seen them recently, so I don't know if they have been updated. Currently, my best lifts in comp are a 262.5 kilo squat, a 180 bench, and a 307.5 kilo deadlifts.
Nice. Yeah, that website needs updating. The squat needs updating.
All right.
The squat is down as 257. Yeah.
Now, in fairness, that wasn't terrible long ago, so I have got it up a little bit more since then. That was from Nationals last year, which is only July, so it's not that terrible long ago.
And even when when those numbers do increase, Arthur, as well, how, in terms of, I know it's probably a stupid question to ask, but let's just say you lifted 257.5 in the squat, and then you went off to the next comp and you did 262. If you were to kind of rate how confident you were in each of those, is that progression there as well in terms of, how am I even trying to ask this? I suppose how the squat felt or how the movement felt overall. Do you know what I mean? You're getting weight progressions, but how do you ever find that progression kind of stays true when you go past these crazy numbers? Does that make sense? Probably doesn't.
I'm very sorry, but it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to realize what I was
know
asking.
what you're asking me.
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to realize what I was asking is probably ridiculous. But yeah, no, it's actually stupid what I was asking you. It's more suited to somebody who's...
Are you asking kind of if my confidence going into the competition, like if I was confident of hitting those numbers, was it?
I think it started out as that, but then it changed in my head as I was asking it. Let's just stick with that. Yeah. Like what's your mental kind of aspect of it going to comps these days like?
Yeah. With squad has been really good, and I don't want to jinx anything, but I've had like my last 5 or 6 comps, or one, my squad has increased, and I've been, I guess my performance has reflected how confident I was in those lifts going into them. Like the last one, the 262, like I was 100% sure I was getting that before it happened, and people that'll say to you afterwards like, oh, why didn't you put 265 on the bar or 267? The plan was 262, and I stuck to that and got it. I mean, I was very, very pleased with that. So, yeah, lately squat in competition has been going quite well, and I've been confident going into it. So, I've missed a few benches and a few deadlifts the last couple of comps. The last one, like 2018 nationals was a bit annoying because my last deadlift, I got it to like maybe 5 degrees short of lockout, and then it just slipped out of my hand, which is just, when you get that close and you know everything else was strong enough to perform the lift, it's kind of sickening, you know.
I'd be like,
hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. we'll just pretend it did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I ask things and I realize halfway through, like, what the fuck am I even asking? Like, yeah, funny. No, Arthur, that was brilliant. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of takeaways there for everybody listening, and hopefully we'll touch base down in City Gym soon, buddy. We'll see you around. But thank you very much for coming on.
No bother at all, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you back in City Gym at some stage over the coming months.
Brilliant. We'll chat to you soon. So guys, that was Arthur Lynch, and again a big thank you for tuning in to the Doc Fitness Podcast. Hopefully there has been some takeaways in that for you. I know, like with podcasts, even for myself, there's always one thing out of whatever length the podcast is that you're always going to sink in with you and take away. So hopefully you found that from this one. And if you did like it as well, if you want to subscribe to listen to all the upcoming shows and whatnot, if you head over to Stitcher if you listen to it on Android, or if you head over to iTunes if you listen to it on iPhone, don't be afraid to click the subscribe button. And I know it's a big ask to leave a review or a rating because it takes effort to fucking do it, but it will be a massive help for me to get the podcast kind of known a little more out there, because they're still relatively small and I want to kind of spread the message more if I can. So I'm hoping these episodes have been of some value to you anyway. All the show notes for this episode, as always, will be at docfitnessonline/episode 14. Arthur's social handles, his powerlifting podcast, etc. will be all there. Everything you need to know will be there for the show. And until next time, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll chat to you soon. Bye bye.